Very good. Let's talk then together about theory and the idea of a theory. So let's do some free association. When you hear theory, what do you think about? Anybody have an association for theory?
A working idea to explain.
Okay. So a working idea. Anybody?
Broad concepts.
Okay, broad concept. For a lot of people, theory brings up the idea of thought, not action. So someone says, well, that's just theories, you know, or that meaning that that's just thinking about stuff. It doesn't really do anything. So for a lot of people, the idea of theory is like that. The word theory comes out of some Greek and Latin bases. And if you were in theater, you would understand that in theater you have spectators who watch something. So actually the word theory goes back to this idea of a group of people watching something. So if you do the etymology, spectators watching a show. So I think this is a nice way to think about what theory is, that you are a spectator watching something happen, and you're trying to make sense of it. You're trying to figure out what's happening here, who's doing what, how do they relate to each other. That's what a theory is. So you're watching a community. In our sense, you're not watching a cell divide or a plant grow. You're watching people communicate, and you're trying to understand it. And so the question of understanding becomes a very important concept. Because like I said before, if you understand how a cell phone operates, if you understand something about frequencies and radio waves and cell towers, you have more power to be able to shape what goes on with it. If you understand how a car works, you have more ability to flex and to solve a problem. So the question of theory is the question of, can I come to a deeper understanding of what's taking place than ordinary everyday ideas about something? So we all have ordinary everyday ways of understanding things. So if two people are having a fight, you turn to your friend and you say, what was that all about? And they say, oh, well, you got to understand this, they're both trying to get the same job, and they're angry at each other, and this one's the favorite of. So you're trying to watch it, understand what's going on, and you have an everyday way of saying that. And so theory comes along and asks the question, as I look at our ordinary ways of explaining what happens, can I come up with criticisms of that or alternative ways to understand it? So it's critical, and it looks for alternative approaches. So for instance, you might watch these two people fighting, and you say, oh, well, here's what's going on. They're both competing for the same job, and one of them is more of a favorite than the other. And on the other hand, you might come up with another theory that says, no, the problem is that our organization creates these issues by the way we're structured. And so it's not a people problem, it's a structure problem. So you come up with an alternative explanation to what's going on. So the theory then leads into a hypothesis which says, I think that this is what's happening. So this is where we kind of connect with research methods courses. So you try to look at what we already think we know. You ask some deep questions about it. You try to find alternative ways. You create a hypothesis. You conduct some research. And hopefully, all of these feed into social, and I'll call it transformation. At the end of the day, Bob Craig and many other people in the communication studies field are saying that in our field we had better get back to the idea that communication is a practical discipline at its root. That it is about changing for the better the way communication happens in our culture, in our society, in our world. So there's a distinctive social element in a lot of what we're going to be reading now, because our field has been pushed by Bob Craig and by Littlejohn and some others over the years to recover its practical roots, that it's rooted in people trying to solve everyday ordinary life problems. And if we do anything, we ought to come with some good deep answers and make a difference in that. So research comes in. And of course that leads into new theories. So this is a cyclical situation. But theories try to accomplish four things, basically. There are four things. So if I say to you, what are theories trying to do? The best thing for you to do is say, well, they're to do four things. They try to describe carefully what goes on. So if you tell me, oh, there was a fight at work today, if I'm theoretically inclined, I want to say, no. Describe to me what happened, who it was, what went on, what was the sequence of what went on. You know, describe it carefully so I can begin to look at the relationships, the timings, the things that went on. And then I want to try to explain the dynamics, the power, what's going on in it. You know, there's a dynamic. What drives this? One way we say this is the mechanism or the drive. What is it that is giving an account for what's happening here? So, for instance, there's a theory called the spiral of silence. That is a theory about why people don't talk about things in certain settings. Why they're afraid to talk about things. And the mechanism in that theory is that people are afraid of being isolated. So that theory says that if my radar detects that this is an unpopular opinion that I hold, I won't talk about it. Why? Because I'm afraid of being socially isolated. So in that theory, Noel Newman's theory about the spiral of silence, the mechanism is fear of isolation. So every theory is driven by something. There's a theory called cognitive dissonance theory, right? It would be psychology. And it's driven by the urge for consistency in life. So part of what you want to get at is what is the mechanism or the motive or the drive that is in this situation? What's going on here? So we try to describe what happens, explain it, what is our reasons for why we think this is happening. Then we move to predict. So the prediction part of theory says, I believe that if these conditions are reproduced, the same things will happen. So I can predict that if this person goes, who I know is a, pro-life person or whatever, and then they go into a pro-choice bunch of people, I predict that they won't talk about that issue. Well, you say, well, that's ordinary every day, everybody knows that. Well, okay, but theory tries to describe it more fully, give it some mechanism, and then make predictions that are tested then. So the theory tries to put it down in an organized, coherent way that can be tested and evaluated. And finally, the goal of a theory is to transform. This last part has been expressed in different words by different writers. One way to say this is to control. Another way to say this is to change. I like the word transform better. I don't like the word control, because people are not machines that you turn this button, you crank this lever, and they work this way. It doesn't happen that way. What theory does is it gives you the ability to say, because I understand the mechanism here, I now have a handle on a thing I can do to maybe change the outcomes. So if there's a fear of social isolation, if I somehow work on that person's ability to tolerate social isolation, then I can predict that they will be more inclined to speak up, because I'm now changing something in the picture. Go ahead.
Suppose it just reminded me of me talking to my father-in-law, who's very far opposite of me politically.
Yeah.
And the reason that I don't, the reason I don't meet him head on when he says things that outrage me is because I have a fear of, the entire sort of familial thing.
Right.
Face.
Right.
So, is it okay to use that if I were to present, the assignment of the...
Right. Yeah, that'd be a great example. And what it would be, would be to demonstrate that this theory is sort of limited, and that when you apply it in a family context, there are additional considerations that need to be taken into account.
Unless I could soften them up by saying, are you willing to accept that there are different, opinions, and then what they're ultimately...
Well, perhaps, there's a new theory out. I just picked it up this week from research. I think it was done out actually in San Francisco area too, where one of the universities did a brain study of people who were liberal and people who were conservative. Did any of you see this? And what they found was that there are different neural processing things going on in people's brains that incline them either to accept, tolerate ambiguity and change, which is a more liberal view, or have less tolerance for ambiguity and change, which is conservative. So that we would call that a communibiological theory that says people are this way or that way because their brain structures are different. They're born that way. So we can predict that if someone has this neurological structure, they will behave this way, and we can transform that by thinking about ways to create new neural pathways through, practice and so on. So there's a theory behind that too.
Does it need to have all four components to your theory?
What's that?
If you have the first three but not the fourth?
No, it doesn't. Some theories are just descriptive theories, or explanatory theories. This is kind of a full-blown look at what theories are. Yeah, Bob Craig and others would say, unless you hit this area, you're not, what good is it? So you described something. What are we going to do with that? So they're always about being able to transform it. So, like when I teach interpersonal communication to undergraduates, that's a great course because it's all about relationships. So they love it. They're talking about their parents, they're talking about their boyfriends, girlfriends, relationship. They're talking about all kinds of relationships they have, and bringing up all the problems that they face. And we just have all these theories, that we can apply to it. The theory of relational formation and the stages of relational formation, the stages of relational dissolution, and the kinds of communication that can turn things around and create long-term relationships, and all the studies. They love all that stuff. Well, that's an example of stuff that's transformative, because you can then give them, on the basis of theory, handles, I call it handles, to get a grip on what's happening in your relationship. You feel like, I don't know what's going on in our relationship, we just can't talk anymore. You say, well, let's look at that, and here's, the way this theory explains it is this, that there's a relational dialectic, and you're always moving between togetherness and separateness, and so you don't need to feel like it all has to be this way or that way, and then they relax and the relationship gets better. You know, it transforms it by understanding theory.
I was just going to say, like, I took interpersonal, like, my senior year as an elective.
Right.
And it is so much fun. Like, if anyone can ever take it, it is the funnest class, if funnest is a word. But I think, like, even if you don't apply, like, what you should, just explaining it to, like, understand it, you feel so much better about it. And, like, it helps. Because, like, my friends actually like, well, this is what you're supposed to do. But no one ever actually listens. But, like, just, like, hearing and, like, knowing, oh, you know, like, this is the theory, and then you're like, oh, yeah, I see exactly. And no one ever wanted to hear the second half of how to fix it. But then if they had to do something. Yeah. Even, like, just to understand it, like.
No, I agree. And
have some part of a transformation.
Understanding is empowering. You can be in ordinary everyday life and just living through things and trying to make do with it. But once you get into some theory, you watched it carefully, you've begun to describe it, explain it, look for the mechanisms involved, and then you can begin to change things. Another example of this is in systems theory, cybernetic theory. One of the things we say is that it will be predictable for human beings that get into a conflict to involve another person in that conflict. So if two people, A and B, have a conflict, there will always be somebody that they try to bring into that conflict. This is predictable. And there's a theory to account for this, that this is all living. You can see this in other animals and nature things too. So you can predict this, but you also recognize from an organizational communication standpoint that this will highly complicate the resolution of any conflicts, because you will have series of interlocking triangles where people are all connected to other conflicts, and you will have this mass of frozenness because everyone's involved other people in it. So your transformation is to teach people the skills they need to deal directly with the people they have a problem with. So you ramp up their conflict skills, you teach them non-defensive ways to address difference, and you begin then to transform the situation on a theoretical basis. So that's an example where theory gives you power, because now you understand, you have a descriptive mechanism. You're not surprised to see it, you could predict it, but you can develop skills that will change the way that functions.
What's that one called again, with the C? The A and the B?
ABC. This is this is called triangulation, the way it's talked about. One of the theories, it's called Bowen theory. There's a huge amount of website stuff on Bowen theory from the Georgetown Family Center. This was actually a family, psychology person. You may have run into Bowen theory. No, not Bowen theory. Bowen theory was attempted to explain schizophrenics years ago, and everyone was dealing with schizophrenics in isolation, trying to counsel schizophrenic. Bowen decided he would bring the whole family in to a center and have them live there for a couple of weeks. He observed all of the relationships, and when he got the other people to behave differently, the schizophrenic's behavior changed. So he believed that people were always part of systems, and that their responses were related to their place and the reactions of others within the system. So Bowen theory is a way to understand organizational dynamics. A guy named Edwin Friedman also developed this. He wrote a book called A Failure of Nerve that talks about leadership in organizations, and very practical stuff that once you start to apply it, you see transformation taking place around you in organizations, and you're like, it's really good. So how do we get into that? So we asked the question whether it was transformation. And you can have theories that are only explanatory theories, but you can probably find ways to deal with them. All right, so where am I?
I have a question. If like a theory wasn't all three, would it be like in a peer-reviewed journal?
Yes. No, some theories. I mean, this is all human stuff. You know, I mean, it's people trying to figure out what's going on. You have to look at comm studies as a quest for understanding. You know, trying to figure out when people are having a fight, what's going on. When a relationship is dissolving, what's going on communicatively. When a team is not working well, what's that about from a communication perspective? You know, when media goes out, what's its effect on people? So that's what's going on in comm studies. And so a lot of our theories, let me point this out. A lot of our theories are scientific theories, and a lot of our theories are interpretive. So there's kind of a distinction here you have to keep in mind. Some of our theories in this field look just like things in psychology and sociology and anthropology and physics almost. You know, they have you know, hypotheses and statistical analysis and, you know, correlation coefficients and all that good stuff that we do in quantitative analysis course. So some things are done by scientific. They look like science. Other theories that we have are interpretive theories. They don't look like numerical things. So you take quantitative research methods and you take qualitative research methods, which is your ethnographies, your textual analyses, which are not done in the same way as this kind of scientific thing. Now, my English major, back there. So you understand the difference between modernist literary criticism and postmodernist literary criticism. Yes, you do. So why don't you tell us in a nutshell what the difference is? Can you? I can do it if you can't.
Let's say I was going back to my...
Too far? Okay.
It's like my first semester in English major.
Okay.
Modern?
Yeah.
What I considered modern was like around 1900 they started talking about modernism. That was like feminism.
Okay.
And slightly right after it. So I can talk about that, but that's not really...
No, that's not what I want to do. Okay. So what's the difference between a scientific theory and an interpretive theory? Here's Western history in 3 feet. So we'll call this 1980. We'll call this 1945. We'll call this 1648. And we'll call this beyond that. Okay? What's that? There's a little jump. This is not to scale. This is not to scale. All right. Long time ago, science didn't exist, right? There's no such thing as scientific method. If you asked about where does the world come from, what would the answer be? It wouldn't be from Big Bang and atoms. It would be faith, tradition. So you have faith and tradition. Joseph Campbell, mythos, myth. You have non-scientific explanations. So what's your theory of how the world was created? You know, there was a big turtle, and then, you know, Cocopelli jumped on it, you know, or something, you know. So that's the way the world was created. So as time went on, you got into the Renaissance, right? Which is earlier than this, which was a resurgence of Greek kind of learning. They went back to Aristotle and all these things. This relates to the Crusades and the way that once you broke up the feudal system in Europe, the people got out into the world. They reclaimed from the Arabic countries the classics, Plato and Aristotle, that were preserved by them. And so you had a renaissance of learning. And then you had a paroxysm in Europe that threw everything up into an apple cart, and you had a 30 years war. 1618 to 1648, you have 30 years of religious war in Europe, where the Catholics and the Protestants and the Lutherans and the Baptists are all killing each other, and it's horrible for 30 years. So in 1648, they decide, we ought to stop this. They say that the Treaty of Westphalia, they say, let's not do this anymore. And so you have people like Descartes and Erasmus, who say, if we're not going to build our life, society around faith and things, what are we going to build it around? Well, the answer is reason. Scientific rationality, reason. Science. So the classic example of this is the rotting meat flies story. Does anybody know the rotting meat flies story? You want to tell us?
Well, just that the idea that if you put a sack, I thought it was wheat or something, but it was like you had a closed sack, and somehow it magically produces all these
flies.
beetles and flies and things, and so it must be
spontaneous generation.
Yeah, spontaneous generation.
Yeah.
Instead of spores or.
Right. So the tradition was that rotting meat produced flies or whatever. So scientific came along and said, well, let's test it with a rational experiment. We'll put a glass bowl over it or something, and we'll leave one out and we'll put one in a glass bowl, and lo and behold, this one doesn't get things and this one does. So now we've applied reason and science to a question instead of just tradition. So this was a big move forward. So we're going to now have a secular realm based on science and reason that will move us into a modern period. It became known as the modern period here. And we made progress, all kinds of progress. We eliminate diseases, we develop technologies, we create communication technologies, we do wonderful things. Reason is terrific, and rationality is wonderful, until we get to around 1945. And then all of a sudden we're starting to wonder about this, because it has taken us to a point where we can now destroy a whole city with a bomb, and we've had the Holocaust, and we've had rational extermination of other people for scientific purification of the race. Maybe this rationality progress thing is not all it's cracked up to be. So we start to get ripples in art and music. And around 1960s, it hits society, and we get the whole, your postmodern time kicks in, where we want to be non-rational, we want to be emotional, we want to be spiritual, we want to move out of this rationality box, because that's going to lead us to a brave new world. It's going to lead us to 1984, the book. It's going to lead us to a dystopia. But meanwhile, in all this period, we have been developing scientific theories of communication, according to the model of the hard sciences. We have followed their methodologies. We have accepted their approaches to knowledge. This is called epistemology, the way we think of knowledge. So we've found. Now all of a sudden, the academics in the university say, no. We need other theories of communication that are more interpretive, more literary, more experiential, not based on scientific things, because that only leads us to a dead-end road where we kill each other. So there's this whole debate about postmodernism, where we no more meta-narratives, no more truth, no more big stories, only fragmented stories. We deconstruct everything that looks stable. We rip it apart and show that it's only fabricated from parts of everything. And so we have this whole postmodern period, and we get names like Baudrillard, Lyotard, Foucault, all of these French theorists, but you were there, so you know these people.
Yeah, Foucault anyway, yeah.
Yeah, right. So that happens for a while. So we get postmodern theories of communication. Then, around 1980 or so, people start to take stock and they say, you know, this postmodern thing has been fun, but what are we going to do now? We have a fragmented social world. Everyone's out doing their own thing. And no one can say anything's better than anything else. And we've deconstructed the person, and the person no longer exists. So what do we got? So you have now a postmodern, awkward as it is, postmodern movement, which asks the question, how are we going to live in community? Sometimes it's called communitarian, philosophically. There's a political communitarian movement. We're not talking about the political movement. We're talking about the philosophical movement.